Welcome to the special program of NewsLive. Today we have with us two distinguished guests, both very well known in their fields. I would like to welcome Mr. Bittu Sahgal. He's an environmentalist and a writer, and let us tell you, he is the founder editor of Sanctuary Asia, one of India's leading ecology and wildlife magazines. And we have with us Mr. Ashok Khosla. He's one of the world's leading experts on environment, and he was also the former director of the United Nations Environment Program. Welcome to the show, sir. Now first, let us also tell our viewers that both of you have been doing lots in creating awareness on environment, on wildlife, ecology and climate change. Now if we talk about Assam, two major issues are hogging limelight here, and for all wrong reasons. One, rampant rhino poaching, and two, the issue of construction of big dams in the region. On the issue of rhino poaching, I would like to ask you, Mr. Bittu Sahgal, 22 rhinos have been killed in a span of 4 months in 2013 itself. Now you are a member of the National Board of Wildlife, Ministry of Environment and Forests. What would you say?
Well, I'd say that my country's priorities are not quite right, are they? Because it's one thing to want to save rhinos, and it's quite another thing to have the Planning Commission or the Prime Minister's office allocate enough money to save rhinos.
Absolutely.
So what we suffer from right now is a lack of resources, a lack of training, and we've put very courageous, very, very good people on the ground who are hopelessly out-equipped by the poaching syndicates. It happens to be the third largest illegal trade in the world, $20 billion trade. We're up against the big boys, serious big boys. We should put big resources behind and stop them now.
Right. We'll talk about this, but if I would like to ask you, Mr. Ashok Khosla, the second big issue that we're talking about is the construction of big dams in the region. What would you say?
Well, you know, dams are created for two reasons. One is to create power, electricity, and the other is to control the flow of waters. We need to do both. As you know, in Assam, there are loads of blackouts and lack of power, and industries complaining all the time, and people don't get electricity at home. And the same applies to floods and the droughts and all the other problems that have
Now, when we talk about construction of big dams, there have been slew of protests, series of demonstrations against the government, against the agencies hankering for big dams. Now, would you consider big dams as a threat to the ecology?
Yes, now I'm just coming to that.
Right.
On the one hand, we need the things that dams are supposed to give us. But in fact, there are other ways to do these things as well. The fact of the matter is that over the last 60, 100 years, we've been making big dams all over the world without looking at the costs that they imply. We only talk about the benefits. The benefits are usually power and flood control, but there are other kinds of things that are thrown at us. The fact of the matter is that there are not many countries now making big dams, and there's a reason for that, because people have started to realize that the costs, not just the costs in terms of economic terms, but ecological terms, in terms of long-term impacts on resources, are huge. And it's only very rare that a big dam makes sense. It's possible. There are places in the world where a big dam may well be appropriate, but they're very few.
So you would say that we shouldn't go ahead with the plan of constructing big dams?
Without doing very careful analysis of both the benefits and the costs. And my reckoning is that in the Indian subcontinent, there are very few sites left where the costs won't be greater than the benefits. So it's unlikely that we will be able to see many more big dams. There are other ways to achieve the same goals, and much cheaper ways, much less costly ways, and we have to now start exploring those.
All right, we'll talk about that again.
No, Ashok is more diplomatic than I am. The bottom line is, with big dams in the Himalaya, that the glaciers are melting.
Right.
All the glacial information and the river flow data has been collected from the 1980s, 85s, 87, 88, 89, 90, and that has been extrapolated over 2012, and the cost-benefit ratios are being built on false sets of data. You can't rely on data in a new climate change world.
And when we talk about a climate balanced world, you mean to say that big dams will never make...
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that Himalayan glaciers are melting, and the entire slew of projects that are being built in the Himalaya right now, from Demwe to Lower Subansiri, all of these dams have to be re-evaluated, not just on the basis of their financial cost, but also on the basis of the damage that they would cause downstream, which was never taken into account.
But the government has plans for this. They have formed committees to look into the damage assessment and also perhaps to minimize the damage in the downstream areas. What would you say on that?
Well, I would say that the government isn't always filled with all the wisdom that's needed. Many of the people who sit on these committees are engineers and economists and political leaders and administrators who don't necessarily understand what it is that the people downstream need, etc. But the point that Bittu's making is even more profound than that. The assumptions that have gone into explaining why these dams should be built by the engineers are no longer valid. Even if they were valid, they would be bad enough. But now that they're not valid, the waters will be available in much smaller quantities, the siltation rates will be much higher, and all the other things that go with that. Then the issue then becomes, first, in any case there was a problem, and now there's going to be a bigger problem, and most of these committees that you're talking about don't necessarily look at all the negative points.
Actually, I was on one of these committees, on several of them in fact. I was on the infrastructure subcommittees, and we evaluated Lower Subansiri.
Right.
And when I went over there, we were told, oh, this is a secondary forest, it's really not very good. It's it was one of the finest primary forests you could ask for. They took us up on a helicopter and we looked at all this and we said that we can't even find a spot here. The tree ground cover was dense, and nevertheless, under political pressure, people like me got shifted off the committees,
so you
and they
say
cleared
political
it.
pressure is there.
Of course there's political pressure, but what was very unsettling was that with Lower Subansiri, there was parts of the conditions that were accepted from the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of Environment, to say Lower Subansiri yes, Middle Subansiri no, Upper Subansiri no.
Okay.
This was part and written on the files as part of the conditions. 4 years later, we go through this process, and now suddenly from the Prime Minister's office there was a request, let us consider again this. So in which case, if you cannot rely upon a commitment made by the Prime Minister's office, then how does one get reasonable about large dams when we know that they are A, causing damage, B, cost benefits are not right, C, primary forests are going to be drowned, and then the government agencies are forced, BSI, ZSI, Botanical Survey of India, they say, oh, there's in a 3-day, 4-day survey, no plants of any, no endangered plants, no endangered animals here. People haven't even walked there. So.
And you know it all.
And.
Right, we'll talk of that again. But coming back to rhino poaching, Mr. Sahgal, the government has been doing whatever it can, and in many times it has also been a mute spectator letting this happen. Now they say they have formed special squads, and they have also introduced drones to hover around Kaziranga National Park to keep a watch on poaching activity. How far do you think that's going to work?
Well, I don't think, as of now, the drones, I think it's a good idea to look to have an eye in the sky, particularly over some of the Brahmaputra islands where you can actually tell under the tall grass and things. The drone's not going to do much good with poaching, but these are experimental things. At the end of the day, mud on the boots of the guys who are sitting down in the park. They need to be supported. They need to be equipped. They must have communications equipment. They must know that if there's a problem, that within 10 minutes time, we will be able to get support from others. There must be a system in place. This doesn't come on a basis of a wish and a dream. We've got very good people. I have to say that the damage to the rhino and the erosion of all that, Kaziranga was the place we would hold out for the rest of the country and say, look at Kaziranga. Why can't you protect Kanha the same way? Why can't you protect Tadoba the same way? There was a drift in leadership, there was a drift in support, there was a drift, and you have to take your eye off the ball for a micro moment, and suddenly the poaching syndicates move in. They are waiting. They are waiting. They are waiting. And we cannot afford to let them.
Drift in leadership, drift in support, everything counts for what is happening in Kaziranga. We have had valid points from both our guests today, and we'll be talking more on this topic, but as of now, we'll take a very short break. Welcome back. We are still in conversation with two renowned environmentalists, Mr. Bittu Sahgal and Mr. Ashok Khosla. Right, we were talking about two major issues that concerns Assam and the region, rhino poaching and construction of big dams. Coming back to rhino poaching, Mr. Sahgal, you said rhino poaching is the third largest illegal trade.
Wildlife, the illegal wildlife, global illegal wildlife trade is the third largest illegal trade in the world.
Right. Where do you see the loopholes exist? You said the government needs to play a big role here. Does the civil society also need to play a role?
No, civil society has to play the role that it plays for any major democratic issue. It must place pressure on its government to protect what it believes is precious and which many aspects and many facets of government might believe is acceptable collateral damage. The way that they build a dam, it's going to affect Dibru Saikwa, it's going to affect Kaziranga. Parts of it are going to get washed away when they release water unseasonable. So the same thing with rhino poaching or with ivory poaching or with timber poaching. If you went through the country, Veerappan's ivory and Veerappan's sandalwood was turned into heroin, it was turned into arms, there was an Israeli purchase, the LTTE was involved. And you can go around the country and you'll find the same thing happen. In Assam.
In Assam, we have had poachers belonging to rebel groups.
Apart from that, Manas, what financed much of the violence, we lost 100 rhinos in Manas. Those rhino horns weren't buried in Manas, they reached China. And they reached it in exchange for money and it fueled violence. So I'm saying...
Startling facts coming to light here.
Well, they were always known, they were just never focused on.
It has to become a national issue at a much higher level,
Right.
and a deeper level. First of all, it is a question of security, of economics, of national well-being overall.
Right.
But then as foreign policy, it's a major issue. If we can't persuade the importing countries that actually are causing this to happen because of the demand for wildlife parts and whatever else, we're not doing our diplomacy. If we're not going to work with the civil, what would you call it, the global civil society on new treaties, new forms of information flows, we're losing out altogether.
Mr. Khosla, you have led a number of global environmental organizations, including the United Nations Development Program, and you're also with the Indian government. What do you think needs to be done by the Assam government now in solving this crisis?
Well, the Assam government alone should not have to solve the entire crisis. Okay. It has to have, in partnership with the national government and other state governments, a strength of being able to deal with it. But within Assam, it has to deploy security forces securing their wildlife resources, their ecological services, which are of great importance, not just for Assam, but for the whole country. And I think the Assamese government not only has to take this whole set of issues really seriously, but also persuade the rest of the country that they are their issues, and indeed the rest of the world. So the Assam government has to actually be serious about this enough to be able to take on a responsible position all over the world.
You had been honored with the Sasakawa Award in 2002, then that's almost equal to the Nobel Prize for Environment. And here I would like to ask you, you know, every year the rot of the river Brahmaputra here affects us in such a way that millions are displaced, people lose their only shelter they have, or destroys the paddy fields. We are an agrarian economy, so the rot of the Brahmaputra is quite hard for us to deal with. What would you say, how to channelize the river water and to prevent it?
Well, first of all, most of the big rivers, whether it's the Nile or the Amazon or the Brahmaputra or the Ganges, these are all rivers that have always flooded. For thousands of years they've flooded, and people lived with it because they were able to build their homes and their industries and their agriculture in a way that actually benefited from the floods. The floods were part of natural processes that brought nutrients and water and therefore more productivity of the land and so on. We have forgotten to live with nature, and what we've been trying to do is to what you call channelize the streams that we live through, not only of water but of air, of flows of materials and everything else, in such a way that they are always under our control. And that causes problems because Mother Nature has already been conditioned to thinking along her own lines and not being told what to do. So while there are many answers to your question, one has to recognize that the simplicity that the engineer and the economists have brought to this thought process is no longer valid.
Okay.
It is a very complex system. We have to, first of all, make sure that we minimize the damage that is possible from floods and from drought and from lack of power and so on by locating our industries and our living spaces, our habitats and so on in a way that isn't subjected to these. But on top of that, obviously, we've actually created problems for ourselves. When we build our highways, we build them. They are highways. We build them above the landscape, which means that when there is a flood, there is no way for the waters to drain out. That means that a flood that used to go away within 2 days now hangs around in Orissa, in Bihar, in Assam for months because the waters can't get away. So we've actually created a very large part of the problem by the kinds of engineering structures we've put in, the kind of drainage systems that we've lost, and so on. So it's a much more complex thing than my being able to say, let's channel the waters in such a way that they won't flood.
Okay.
They will flood, and we have to learn to live with that, but we will also be able to minimize the costs of that by doing things in a very different kind of way.
For instance, allowing the forests to stay. The forests were always the ones that would temper the floods. Then they would hold the floods and let the water go down in the aquifers, and then it would release it slowly. Glaciers and forests, this is what they do. Now the glaciers are going and we're cutting the forests, so I'm a little worried.
We're creating the floods.
Right. We have had valid points from both our guests today, and we'll be talking more on this topic, but as of now, we'll take a very short break. Welcome back. We are still in conversation with two renowned environmentalists, Mr. Bittu Sahgal and Mr. Ashok Khosla. Both of you seems like you are at the forefront of a battle almost to protect the nation, from the effects of climate change. So what are the chances, like when I talk about minimizing the soaring rate of species extinction or contributing towards a greener environment, do you think we can do it still? It's happening?
Well, we have to do it because there is no future forget our children, ourselves. These things are happening at such an incredible rate. The extinction of species is going at 100 times the background rate that evolution is used to dealing with. Climate change is moving at an incredible rate, but long before climate really has a huge impact on our lives, there are many other things. Food production is going to be in serious trouble. We already see the phosphate cycles disappearing, a whole range of issues with acidification of oceans. Fisheries have collapsed. Less than 2 months ago, one tuna, one single fish was sold for $1.75 million in Japan. This is an indicator of a system that is in very deep trouble. It's very, very sick. And obviously, we have to deal with this very, very fast. India has the ability to notice these things. There's a very strong civil society, NGOs, voluntary organizations, academics, who know and feel strongly about these things. Our governments are not unaware. They're not ignorant, though they sometimes behave as though they are. But there is a very large media. There's a very large ability for us as a nation to do things that many other countries wouldn't be able to do. And we're, as he said, as Bittu was saying, we're centrally located in a squeezed position. We're being squeezed from every side, from the Himalayas, from the seas, from the salinization of our soils and waters. He says 30 million. My estimate is more
Probably
like 60
more.
million.
Yeah.
Eco-refugees are going to suddenly appear at your doorsteps, and there aren't going to be enough boats to take them to Canada. I mean, frankly,
Well, that's scary, in fact.
there are many scary things going on right now. So the urgency of this means that we have to now actually do things today, not in 10 years' time. And our young, the people who watch your kind of shows, are going to have to take a lot more responsibility for the world, not just for their own careers and their own professions, but the welfare of all the people around them. And I think it's now become really important that we get the message out.
At this point, I would like to ask you, Mr. Sahgal, you are doing a lot for children. You are helping 1 million children come close to wildlife, to nature, to your for your program Tiger for Kids, Kids for
Kids for
Tigers,
Tigers,
Kids for
yeah.
Tigers. Would you tell us about it?
Well, I focus on children essentially because I am more than a little disillusioned with my generation.
And he's never grown up anyway.
The children, I mean, they are wonderful. They understand. If they look at you and say, oh, there's a pimple on your nose, they won't look around and pretend it isn't there. So they tell you the truth, but they don't offend. And they don't suffer that disease of cynicism and despair. You know, they are trusting. So I would ask people of my generation in this country that why did Mahatma Gandhi, why did Rajendra Prasad, why did Dr. B.C. Roy, why did all these people spend their lives to give us freedom? It was to prevent somebody from colonizing our people's properties and land and lives. I don't think my generation has the right to impose colonization on the young, on you.
Right.
And that is why I completely agree with Ashok. Young people have to get and assert themselves, not badly, not rudely, but to say that this is not our priority. Our priority now is climate change is real. Let's get together, let's fight against an enemy. Let's not fight amongst ourselves. Rich and poor, north and south, white and black. This is not a fight.
Right.
This is
Wonderful. Mr. Sahgal, Mr. Khosla, you have been invited here by the Balipara Foundation. Good thing for us, you know, they are honoring you, and we are taking examples from you. What would you say of this initiative of Balipara Foundation to honor the heroes?
Well, I think that what the Balipara Foundation and Ranjit Barthakur in particular, what he's doing is he is resurrecting the pride of the people of the Northeast, and basically through these awards, he is saying you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be powerful, you have to be well-intentioned, and you have to just do what you know you have to do.
Right.
So he is actually showing the rest of the country how we can escape climate change. He's come up with a concept called naturenomics, which is economics in tune with nature. All of economics is founded on a bedrock of ecology. If the ecological foundations are shaken, forget GDP, forget growth, forget all these things. And Ranjit Barthakur is doing things the right way.
Okay.
He is speaking to economists, and he's speaking to ecologists, and he's speaking to people who are way down on the community, on the ground. And I think he'll be able to bring this together, and those are the people that are being honored. Our heroes are not the people who drive around flashy cars and can throw around wads of money. Those are the guys who should be actually...
And you too, the real heroes.
Well, not us, the heroes.
Always at the forefront, and
We're
that's
always
commendable.
searching for heroes.
We must
That's
change our
commendable.
heroes.
And with real heroes like them standing at the forefront always to save Earth, to save climate, and to help contribute towards a greener environment, to help children, to help young ones like us come forward and contribute. It's commendable indeed. And thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure having both of you here, and we hope that you'd continue with your noble mission always.
Thank you.
Thank you.